heard something chilling. As Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un walked together in Beijing, a hot mic picked up an unguarded conversation about organ transplants and the possibility of living up to 250 years. This was not a macabre small talk amongst aging dictators. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, a glimpse into a world where human beings can be treated as interchangeable parts to prolong the lives of autocrats. But forced organ harvesting is not healing. It is murder, masquerading as medicine. Today, this commission examines one of the most barbaric human rights atrocities of our time, the forced harvesting of organs from prisoners of conscience, death row inmates, and other vulnerable people, especially in communist China. Let me be clear, ethical organ transplantation is noble and life-saving. But what we are examining today is the polar opposite. It is a conversion of the imprisoned and persecuted into inventory. Hearts, livers, kidneys, lungs, corneas, taken from living, sold to the desperate, hidden behind hospital walls, protected by secrecy, corruption, fear, and state power. I shared my first of several hearings on forced organ harvesting 30 years ago on June 18th, 1996, 30 years ago. And as Jan knows, we had many, many hearings focusing especially what was being done horribly to the Falun Gong. And since then, the evidence has become even more disturbing, more detailed, and more compelling. The most persistent allegations in China centered first on the Falun Gong practitioners, peaceful men and women targeted by the Chinese Communist Party for eradication, genocide. Later came mounting evidence concerning Uyghurs, already victims of genocide in the Uyghur region, Tibetans, Christians, death row inmates, and others treated as property of the state. Experts like Ethan Gutmann have documented how this atrocity expanded from death row prisoners to prisoners of conscience and religious detainees. The China Tribunal concluded that forced organ harvesting has been committed in China for years on a significant scale. Witnesses at previous hearings have warned us about military hospitals, impossibly short wait times in order to procure an organ, organs available on demand, and a transplant system that cannot withstand scrutiny. And yet, Beijing now asks the world to believe that the problem has somehow been solved. It says the transplant system now meets international standards, and once again, the disappointing and corrupt WHO takes Beijing's claims at face value, just as they did in the early days of COVID. But today, this commission has received rare and extraordinary eyewitness accounts from inside the Chinese gulag itself. Ali Montavalian written submission details his incarceration in a PLA-linked prison hospital near Shanghai, and Kalbinur Sidik's testimony from the detention camps in the Uyghur region. Together, their accounts shatter Beijing's fiction that its transplant system is voluntary, transparent, and compliant with international standards. Ali Montavalian spent years inside China's prison system. His submission describes coerced thumbprints on so-called consent forms, bondage tranquilizers, last rooms of terminal patients, prisoners taken to surgery and not returned, mobile freezer carts and bodies moved towards incineration. His account strikes at the heart of Beijing's favorite defense. The Chinese Communist Party told the world it had ended the use of executed prisoners' organs. And I would just again point out parenthetically, and Sam will remember this, Sam Brownback, Harry Wu brought over a guard who brought evidence that was absolutely compelling, and he testified in the late 90s. And he pointed out that the ambulances would be lined up one after the other. They would shoot the prisoner, not to kill, but to just put them into a coma, take their organs, and then that individual would die. And you know, that was almost 30 years ago. The 30-year ago hearing didn't have that, but Harry Wu was just amazing in what he brought forward. And there were people in the administration then that didn't want to hear that. And we tried, but they didn't want to hear it. Inside the prison hospital system in 2020 and 2021, Years after being told the world it had stopped taking organs from prisoners, Ali says he saw unconscious, shackled men, known as sleepers, brought by armed personnel directly into the surgery rooms. They never returned. My God, what a nightmare. This is not voluntary donation. This is execution by organ extraction. Mr. Sidik brings us inside another part of the Chinese gulag, the camps of the Uyghur region. I will not summarize his testimony in detail because in just a few minutes she will speak for herself. But her account shows a system where human beings are reduced to commodities, where state controls the body as well as the mind, and where coercion and fear are used to destroy dignity. The prison hospitals and gulag described in these testimonies are not a place of care, rehabilitation, or education. They are crime scenes, part of a system of coercion, medical abuse that knows no parallel in genocide in China. Organ crimes are not just a Chinese problem. It is a global one that flourishes wherever coercion, poverty, corruption, secrecy, and demand intersect. That's why Congress must act. The House has twice passed my legislation with overwhelming bipartisan support. Most recently, H.R. 1503, the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act, passed the House 400-1 a full year ago, and it's still languishing in the Senate, but it passed a full year ago. It would criminalize forced organ trafficking, impose serious sanctions, require reporting, deny visas, and create penalties of up to 20 years in prison and up to $1 million for knowingly being complicit in this crime. The bill is not a press release. It is enforceable policy. It says to brokers, traffickers, corrupt officials, complicit doctors, hospitals, researchers, insurers, and middlemen, if you profit from coerced transplants, directly or indirectly, you should risk your money, your visa, your access to the U.S., and your freedom. Because if we can get you, you're going to jail for these heinous practices. The Senate has not yet acted on the bill, and I appeal to them. I believe that they must delay is denial for that poor 25 to 30-year-old, as Ethan Gutmann has told us over and over again, average age 28, who is killed, murdered, just for their organs. Every day without consequences is another day of perpetrators operating in the shadows. Witnesses are intimidated, evidence disappears, and families never learn what happened to their loved ones. Forced organ harvesting is barbaric. It is systematic, it is state-enabled, and it's a big business. And speaking frankly, no one wants Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin to live forever. I suspect on this point there would be broad bipartisan agreement. But behind that dark money is a deadly serious point. No dictator, no party boss, no wealthy patient, and no broker should be able to purchase longevity with the organs of the poor and the persecuted. That is all the more reason to pass the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act and make unmistakably clear that the United States will not stand by in the face of such cruelty. Not with our expertise, not with our money, not with $1 of American complicity. Thank you. Maybe an opening? Okay, thank you. I would like to now introduce our very distinguished panel. And let me just say parenthetically, I'm grateful that C-SPAN is here. You know, they can go to any hearing they want. They are private, as you know, and they have chosen to be here. And this is a story that they now will be telling to the entire American public. And I'm very, very grateful that they give these distinguished witnesses the opportunity to be heard again throughout this country, and hopefully that leads to a greater mobilization to stop this. We will first start with Ethan. With Ethan Gutmann, Senior Research Fellow in China Studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and co-founder of the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. He is the author of The Slaughter, co-author, and I've read that book, co-author of the influential 2016 investigative report, Bloody Harvest, The Slaughter, and Update, and author of the newly published book, the Xinjiang Procedure, based on interviews with Uyghur and Kazakh refugees throughout Central Asia. His work has been essential to exposing the scale and brutality of forced organ harvesting in China, and we're extremely grateful for his continued leadership. We'll then hear from my good long-term friend, Ambassador Sam Brownback, who served in the House, the Senate. He was a governor. He was an ambassador at large for international religious freedom, and just a force in the world for good, especially religious freedom. He just today, or the last couple of days, released his brand new book, and I'm looking forward to reading it, called China's War on Faith. And thank you, Sam, for that tenacious leadership for all these years. You just never quit. You are a national treasure, and I am very grateful to you. Ambassador Brownback and Ethan Gutmann have testified multiple times before this commission and multiple committees of Congress on issues related to forced organ harvesting, human trafficking, and of course, religious freedom. And then we'll hear from Jan Jekielek, senior editor of the Epoch Times and host of American Thought Leaders. He is a journalist, documentary filmmaker, and author of Killed to Order, a new book, China's Organ Harvesting Industry and the True Natures of America's Biggest Adversary. And I encourage people to read that. I've started it. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm looking forward to reading it in its entirety. His work has helped bring wider public attention to forced organ harvesting and the dangers of continued international complicity. We welcome him to the commission, thank him for his great leadership for these many years, and we've known each other for a lot of years on this and so many other issues. He's a great friend of the China Commission. We'll then hear from Kalbinur Sidik, I should say, a survivor of China's genocide and an eyewitness to the forced labor and internment camp system in the Uyghur region. Of Uzbek ethnicity, he served for many years as an elementary school teacher before being forced to work as a Chinese language instructor in internment camps. He's testified several times, including before the Uyghur Tribunal in London. So I want to thank him for being here. Her, I should say. She'll be coming in through Zoom, right? Yep. Yes. Thank you. So, Mr. Gutmann, please, the floor is yours.
In the Chinese transplant industry, humans are the only element that can't be fully controlled. That's why I swear by field research. And over time, I've learned that all testimony, even that which doesn't support my ongoing thesis at any given time, is valuable. Yet, I've also been observing the often skeptical Western world. That includes myself back in 2006. And all witnesses are taking a big risk. Camp refugees who observed the organ harvesting selection process or were nearly harvested themselves, as I guess we're going to be hearing from some of those today, they matter. But the testimony of a medical practitioner who was directly involved in the transplant process has a more complex level of risk, and they may matter more in some respects. Now, I'll briefly focus on these medical witnesses because there's a continuity there that's very interesting that's over time. I'm going to recap current harvesting rates one more time with feeling. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to touch on Uyghur deportation from Central Asia, and I'll close with a few personal thoughts on policy. Now, regarding the slaughter, we have two witnesses from that. 15 years ago in a Westminster hearing, Enver Tohti, a former Uyghur hospital surgeon, confessed that he used his own hands to extract the kidneys and liver of a wounded but salvageable human being on a Xinjiang execution ground. In 2013, Dr. Ko Wen-je of National Taiwan University agreed that I could publish the story of his quest for organs on behalf of his Taiwanese patients. This happened in a mainland hospital, probably Wuxi People's Hospital. When Ke expressed doubts about the quality of executed prisoner organs, his mainland counterparts assured him that all the organs will come from Falun Gong. The Xinjiang procedure, I just have to promote these things, I'm sorry, adds to this collection. In 2007, an accidental witness, Kat, that's Mr. Sugawara, was assisting his Yakuza chieftain prepare for a liver transplant in a Beijing police hospital. Wandering into the wrong room, Kat found a bound and sedated young man wrist and ankle tendons severed. A Chinese surgeon soothingly explained to Kat that the young liver donor was Falun Gong. In 2017, Saragul Satbe, a teacher in a Kazakh and Uyghur camp, gained exclusive access to organize the camp's medical files. A red check mark next to blood results signaled the individual had been pre-selected for harvesting. Several camp refugees that I interviewed recalled guards imposing color coding from pink vests to wristbands a few nights before the actual disappearances. In 2018, Samal, a Kazakh ethnic woman, that is a pseudonym, Samal, she was recruited by a Uyghur veterinarian to extract human intestines in preparation for the systematic extraction of organs. Why intestines? Because their workspace was in a secret medical compound 4 floors under a Uyghur and Kazakh concentration camp with substandard ventilation. And an update. Well, Dr. Ke of Taipei knew that the Falun Gong were being harvested. According to his Chinese colleagues, Ke became the teacher of ECMO to mainland China. That was, let me translate that. That is directly instructing Chinese surgeons to exploit an off-label procedure for live organ harvesting. As mayor of Taipei and as a presidential candidate for the Taiwan presidency, Ke could have been the ultimate medical witness. Instead, Ke was recently sentenced to 17 years in Taiwanese prison on corruption charges, and I'd love to see a plea deal there. Along with a hunger for medical witnesses, there is a hunger for scale. And the full publication of witness evidence in Chapter 5 concludes 2.5 to 5% forced disappearance rate in the camps, average age 28 to 29, specifications taken at night, final blood DNA test to establish health and identity. Assuming 1 million in the Xinjiang camps, forced labor factories, and other carceral environments, that's 25,000 to 50,000 Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic groups harvested per year. 2 to 3 organs extracted per individual to reach the minimum requirements for China's transplant industry volume. 60,000 successful transplants per year. That means a minimum cumulative death total in Xinjiang of over 200,000 now and counting. Now, some analysts recently speculated that the camps are closing, and it may be inside baseball, but I would welcome a question on that. Either way, forced labor organs are the same as concentration camp organs, and per capita medical attention that Xinjiang receives is extraordinary. Beijing recently pledged 6 more human organ transplantation medical institutions in the region by 2030. Now, the roundup of Uyghurs from China's neighbors is also extraordinary. My interviews established that 88% of Tajikistan's Uyghurs and 87% of Kyrgyzstan's Uyghurs have been deported back to Xinjiang. I also documented a new Chinese military base just north of Tajikistan's Kolma Pass, about 30 miles from a Tajik mine speculated to contain 50% of the world's uranium. The energy and mineral reserves of the Pamir and Kyrgyz mountain ranges are the South China Sea of China's western frontier. With Russia at war, without a U.S. presence, a new 9-dash line is theoretically possible. Regarding policy, we'll close with this. I like all the bills, but I support passing the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act first because it follows the surgical lead. The International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation put the Chinese transplant industry and implicitly the Transplantation Society on notice with an academic boycott of China in 2022. Withdrawal of legitimacy by the political side should now be immediate and comprehensive. Nothing changes without embarrassment and trauma. One day after my press conference on Dr. Ke, Taiwanese medical authorities withdrew immunosuppressive drug coverage for Taiwanese patients who received Chinese organs. We could do that here. And instead of attempting to police the entire import-export medical industry, we could immediately investigate Thermo Fisher for providing the DNA test used on an estimated 10 million Uyghurs and Kazakhs. A word on limitations. The party responds to embarrassment by hiding, adapting, altering the production process, and adding new layers of complexity. We've seen this in forced labor. Beijing loves games, so we might need to consider changing the stakes of the game. I don't have a 20-point plan here, just a parting thought. Falun Gong is a Han Chinese majority Chinese spiritual movement. And they have no choice. Their sacred mission is to change China, and they deserve our support. Yet small nations rise. Often it's a delayed response when mass murder and wanton neglect have placed their future survival as a people in question. The potato famine, Ireland, Ukraine, Stalin's mass starvation, Israel, the gas chambers, East Turkestan, organ harvesting. Re-entering history is a bloody affair, yet these nations came back from the dead. Even if it begins as a cynical negotiation tactic, a tacit threat, a Uyghur state, even a democratic Uyghur state, is possible, and the liberation of Central Asia is also possible. For the party, that's the nightmare scenario. And the most improbable scenario of all is the systematic reform of the Chinese transplant system. But if our first objective is to staunch the bleeding, apply immediate and consistent pressure, pass this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Gutmann, thank you so very much for your testimony, and your expertise enlightens this committee and it really enlightens all that we do. So thank you so much. Ambassador Brownback.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Senator. Good to see all of you. And thank you for doing this, particularly today, where the summit is taking place in China. I think this is just such an incredibly timely thing. And while these are hearings and things that you're familiar with and have been familiar with for years, the public is not familiar with these topics, unfortunately. In my experience in social movements, you've got to really rub the public's face in this stuff for them to get it. And once they do, then they'll kind of, okay, what should we do? And thank you for rubbing people's face in this stuff that you've known about and heard about for 20, 30 years, as have I. Even just yesterday, I was with Marigold Tursun. She's featured in our book, China's War on Faith, and she's a Uyghur. She was told finally before, this is toward the very end of her incarceration, okay, you can pick the way you die. We'll either shoot you 3 times, 3 bullets, or you can sign your life and your organs away to us. Now, if you pick the 3 bullets, we're going to charge you for each of these bullets a very large sum of money, and you can do it for free this other way. And you go, how cynical can a group of people be? This is her speaking yesterday about the technique that was used. Our children who were born in Egypt ultimately actually were the tool that got her out. Disfavored religious communities are particularly targeted by the perpetrators of forced organ harvesting schemes. Falun Gong practitioners, which we've heard about, systematically cataloged based on biometric markers and then murdered for their organs. Uyghur Muslims, and you've heard this before, their organs harvested and marketed to wealthy Middle Easterners as halal, and in an unimaginably cynical way doing this. And I don't like even repeating these because these charges are so horrific that they are virtually, people have a hard time in their mind even getting their mind around it. But this is happening and has been happening and continues to happen, and it's an evil regime that perpetrates it. We have here today, and Mr. Chairman, if I could take just a moment to introduce, you've got here the gentleman Peter Hsu. You may remember his name. You advocated for him, as I did a number of years ago, spent 5 different times in Chinese prison. He's been out here helping promote the book. He was considered the Billy Graham of China. They nearly killed him when they took him down he put him in a cross formation until he nearly died. They took him down. They said to him, okay, sign the confession that God's a hoax, Jesus doesn't exist. And he looks at the warden and he says, thank you for allowing me to participate in the sufferings of Christ. Just an amazing testimony of an individual who is here, and I've got to recognize Peter Hsu. And then the other person that's Bob Fu is hosting these gentlemen. You know Bob. But Pastor Pan of the Mayflower Church that got all 64 members of theirs out in a daring episode that I believe should be a Hollywood movie is here with us as well. Pastor Pan, wonderful men. They bear witness, and as they bear witness, they get family members persecuted back home. These are not free shots that people get to take. They get hit. Pastor Pan has relatives still in China being threatened. And I would ask our State Department to allow them to come if they're allowed out of China. Allow them to come here to the United States. Here's a brave man being willing to speak out, and the family members back home are still persecuted. And I hear this constantly from members of this persecuted community, of the various religious persecuted communities. You have experts that know more of the specifics of it. I want to talk mostly about policy. Number one, the United States should lead a global coalition of governments, academics, medical, financial institutions, and religious groups to openly condemn forced organ harvesting and take concrete steps to end the international complicity in this practice. We need a big coalition to come together and to say, this is horrific, it deserves to be no place in a modern world, and we should condemn it. The White House or Congress should host a global summit of religious, democratic, and political leaders calling for religious freedom for everyone everywhere, including in China. This is a hallmark issue for us, and on our 250th birthday, this founding of the country is based, the early settlers, primarily on seeking religious freedom. And it's still a hallmark human right of the soul, the right that's closest to who we are as a being, and these are the people the most persecuted. It would help, and it would help them substantially. We ask President Trump to raise with Xi Jinping the release of Pastor Ezra Jin, and he's said that he's going to seek that release. Jimmy Lai, and I would add, the 9 Catholic bishops currently in detention in China that we don't know their whereabouts. 9 Catholic bishops, and we don't know where they are. They're incarcerated. And I would ask as well that Pope Leo would criticize China publicly for the ongoing genocides in that country of the Muslim Uyghurs, of Falun Gong, of the Tibetan Buddhists, and seek the release of these 9 Catholic bishops that are detained in China. And, Mr. Chairman, I've got another set of additional recommendations that I want to submit for the record, but one of them, we host the G20 summit this year. We should have in that a major section on religious freedom. As we bring these world leaders of the top countries here, we should be talking about religious freedom and condemning publicly forced organ harvesting at that event. This would be something that Dr. Gutmann points out, the embarrassment factor. It's a true issue, and you and I both know it. You've got to raise the profile of these issues to the point that governments are embarrassed before something happens. We should do that at the G20 summit as well. And then finally, our media, Hollywood, academia, big business must start shining a light on these horrific practices being conducted by the Chinese government and no longer look the other way. We cannot look the other way. Now, we've got such an integrated economy with China, and I hope and pray we're in the process of breaking that apart and breaking our supply chains and moving it to other places. And I'm seeing positive trends on foreign direct investment in China going down substantially, a lot of that coming to the United States and other places going up, which is favorable towards us. That's the right trend. It's going to take several years to disentangle these two economies, but we really have got to be clear-minded that we have to move this way. This is a communist regime in China that seeks our removal from the leadership on the world stage. And whichever one of these systems, and I contend that, and I'm going to end with this point, that we're in a clash of civilizations now. And one point of that is the communist group and authoritarians that look at the world and individuals as tools to be controlled or economic entities alone. And they are pushing aggressively and attacking us today. And on the other side is Western civilization. It's the United States leading a Western civilization that's built on a Judeo-Christian ethic, that everybody is created in the image of God. They are entitled to incredible dignity. They have inherent worth of who they are. and they have rights by virtue of who they are as an individual. They have rights. These two systems are in conflict and clashing. And I think we've just got to start being much more clear-eyed about what the stakes are, because whichever of these systems wins will direct how societies move over the rest of this century. And we're in this fight, and we're in it now. And we've got to sound the alarm to the public and move forward aggressively to win this fight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your very, very eloquent and powerful statement and testimony. I'd like to now recognize Jan Jekielek for such time as he may consume.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, distinguished members of the Commission, I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify today. How many of us in the United States would knowingly participate in a system that rips organs from unwilling donors and treats human lives as disposable commodities? It should be zero, but it's not. What is happening in China is something far more systemic and industrialized than the organ trafficking in black markets that one might normally think about. It is Communist China's state-sponsored killing of its own citizens on demand to supply a multi-billion-dollar transplant industry. I'll start with a telling example from my book, Kill to Order, China's Organ Harvesting Industry and the True Nature of America's Biggest Adversary. Quote, an affluent German woman with a rare AB blood type struggled with alcoholism for years and faced liver failure. In systems like Germany's, finding a match might take years or not happen at all, yet she obtained 3 livers in China around 2015 to 2019, each in just months, for approximately $400,000, involving a visit to China for each procedure. Her continued drinking, combined with anti-rejection medications, led to quick rejections of each liver, one about every 2 years. In any ethical transplant system, such as that of the United States, vital organs typically come from catastrophic accidents. To reduce the chance of rejection, blood type and histology are also matched. Thus, the supply of organs is always much less than the demand. Yet wait times in China are often measured not in years, not in months, but in weeks or even days. Yet in another well-documented case, an American man traveled to China and received a perfectly matched kidney in just 2 weeks. According to the 2009 book, Larry's Kidney, he was aware someone was killed for it. Now compared to that here, where the average wait time for a new kidney isn't 2 weeks, but 156 to 260 weeks. This is only possible because of 2 essential tools the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, that governs China has refined over decades. Number 1, it's the regime's creation of what are called black classes, designated enemy groups that the rest of the population is taught to hate, fear, and even see as subhuman. First, it was the landowners, then counter-revolutionaries, and then the intellectuals during the Cultural Revolution, with others following. This is the pattern. Designate a group as subhuman, flood the information space with propaganda, and the population becomes psychologically prepared for atrocities against the target group. The second key tool is the infrastructure to incarcerate large number of people at will. Prisons, black jails, re-education camps, and forced labor camps are just part of an incarceration system that has the capacity of millions. In 1999, the CCP designated Falun Gong practitioners as a black class targeted for eradication, setting the stage for this kill to order forced organ harvesting. Falun Gong or Falun Dafa is an ancient Qigong or slow motion exercise practice rooted in the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. This is also translated as being true, good, and enduring. Falun Gong features extensive teachings by its founder, Master Li Hongzhi. It's also characterized by an unusual lack of organizational structure, no collection of funds, no roster, no hierarchy, and no worship of a deity. It's spread by word of mouth in the 1990s in China, growing, by government estimate, to 70 to 100 million people from all walks of life doing it. There are different theories as to why then leader Jiang Zemin of China ordered the persecution of Falun Gong. Perhaps it was because the sheer number of practitioners had grown greater than Communist Party membership. Perhaps he was jealous of the founder. Or perhaps the CCP, with its decades of totalitarian rule, simply couldn't abide by the individual agency that practicing Falun Gong fostered in people. If one were to design a system that could withstand totalitarian control and overreach, I believe it might look something like Falun Gong. So large numbers of Falun Gong practitioners refused to be re-educated, and this happened at a scale that had never happened before in this black class creation mechanism. And this is what caused the mass incarceration of Falun Gong practitioners. Okay, this is happening in 1999, 2000. In 2005, the US State Department estimated that half of all the people in China's re-education through labor camp system were Falun Gong. In 2006, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Manfred Novak, reported that Falun Gong practitioners accounted for 66% of torture cases that he documented. So I recount in Chapter 5 of Kill to Order that brings together all sorts of evidence, like gathered by Ethan Gutmann here, among others, research over 20 years by many, many different experts. And the regime basically took a massive population of healthy people and dehumanized them, incarcerated them, and started blood typing, tissue typing, and organ scanning them and creating a database. When a transplant is needed, whether for a Chinese elite or a foreign transplant tourist, a match can be made and a victim killed to order. The years 2000 to 2005 saw a massive surge in growth of transplant hospitals in China. Falun Gong refugees who fled to the United States have given harrowing accounts of blood tests and other costly and suspicious medical exams while detained in China. A recent survey identified 113 facilities across China in which these health screenings took place, with the most recent incident reported in 2024. Shockingly, one respondent described how, even in 2023, even non-detained practitioners in Anqing City, Anhui Province, were summoned for these detailed exams. We now have the first known survivor. Cheng Pei-ming, a Falun Gong practitioner, was taken for surgery against his will while detained and awoke with a 14-inch gash in his side. This was back in 2004. He was later rescued to America through a series of unlikely events, kind of a miracle that he survived. But basically, our own medical scans showed that he's missing part of his liver and part of his lung. The liver has since regenerated. So after years of very little, frankly, there's been some amazing resolutions that have been forth, that Co-Chair Smith has put forward and so forth, but really internationally, there's been very little meaningful action. And the CCP extended this atrocity. Now we're looking at 2015-ish to another group. As mentioned, they further dehumanized the Uyghur Muslim population and mass incarcerated them. And up in Xinjiang, they've even gone door to door to people's homes collecting DNA and blood samples. So compounding this danger is new technology. So now there's technology that can perfuse organs for extended periods, basically in a box, potentially for days instead of hours. And so this is a revolutionary breakthrough for us. This is, this will save a great many lives. But from the perspective of the Chinese, this is a way potentially to even export forced organs out of the country if they get their hands on it. So this is why I titled my book Kill to Order. This is a deadly boutique selection and delivery of human body parts. Organs matched in advance, delivered on schedule, extracted from living human beings who are then discarded for the purposes of power, profit, and elite longevity. Yet American universities and hospitals continue to partner with Chinese transplant centers, train Chinese transplant surgeons, conduct joint research. The NIH has funded such projects. American companies supply critical immunosuppressive drugs and medical technologies used in these procedures. And many American media continue to ignore or even whitewash these crimes. Perhaps most prominently, a former New York Times correspondent testified to the 2019 China Tribunal that the co-chair mentioned earlier, that she was prevented from pursuing evidence of forced organ harvesting by her editors at the Times. And now this is not an isolated crime. It's part of a much broader pattern of egregious abuses. The US government has determined that the CCP is committing genocide against Uyghurs. And several international legal experts have concluded the campaign against Falun Gong also demonstrates genocidal intent. So what can be done here? I want to take this moment to commend Co-Chair Smith for your tremendous persistent efforts over many decades confronting China's large-scale forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, and for championing China's persecuted innocents even longer than that. You grasped the totalitarian nature of the CCP long before most people did. This is manifested in your bill, H.R. 1503, the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act of 2025, which passed the House last year near unanimously. This is powerful, important legislation that should be passed. Another commissioner here, Senator Merkley, is co-sponsoring S4009, the Falun Gong and Victims of Forced Organ Harvesting Protection Act, a Senate update of H.R. 1540, which passed the House unanimously. This is likewise critical legislation that will make a real difference. The Senate has a historic opportunity now to pass 2 bills to finally confront this egregious crime. 8 countries have enacted binding national laws addressing this issue. It's time for the United States to finally do the same. I have a number of additional recommendations across the board, but in the interest of time, perhaps we can do them in the question and answer. Happy to discuss. I also wanted to mention that now we have many think tanks in Washington, D.C., civil society organizations. Even there's a satellite Rotary Club dedicated entirely to ending forced organ harvesting. There's kind of a broad civil society interest in this. And as mentioned earlier, the International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation has barred all Chinese submissions involving transplants from human donors. This is finally getting traction at that level, thankfully. So to conclude, here we're on the eve of the 250th anniversary of America's founding. And we should remember that this country was built on a foundation of belief in the God-given right of every individual and the inherent dignity of every human being. The Chinese Communist Party rejects this truth at its core. It views its own citizens not as people with innate dignity, but as a collection of extractable body parts. And here's the hard truth. The CCP looks at America and Americans through exactly the same lens. Just as it calculates the value of a prisoner's cornea or kidney or heart, it calculates how to extract America's technology, markets, its alliances, and ultimately its sovereignty. Earlier today in Beijing, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has championed earlier versions of S4009 as senator, said, China's rise cannot come at our expense. The lesson of the CCP's decades of kill-to-order forced organ harvesting is that the regime is capable of anything at others' expense. Let us honor the 250th anniversary of this nation's founding by confronting this atrocity. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Jan, thank you so very much for your leadership over the many decades as well, for your new book, which I think will open up many eyes, and again, for being here today and sharing your expertise with the Commission. I'd like to now ask Ali to translate. We will be hearing from Ms. Sidik. She's in the Netherlands by way of Zoom, so if that could be arranged for her to come in now.
Salam Kalbinur, qanday yaxshimisiz?
Remember, she's an eyewitness and to China's genocide as she's coming on, and for the internment camp system. Here's somebody who lived it, like many people who have testified in the past, and some people who are actually in this audience. So, and suffered. And just let me say one brief thing about Bob Fu while she's coming on. Bob Fu has been a mentor to so many of us for so long. I've been to China along with Frank Wolf and along with my good friend, the ambassador, many, many times. And again and again and again, Bob provided unbelievable insights to us of the house church movement and all the rest. So thank you, Bob, for that with China Aid. Is she ready?
Ben tayyor.
Keep speaking.
Yeah, ben tayyor.
There she is. Oh, there she is. Good.
Kalbinur, unda bo'lsa o'zingizni tanishtirishni boshlasangiz bo'ldi, qisqacha. Rahmat.
Bo'ldi. Assalomu alaykum. Hurmatli rais efendi, hurmatli yuqori darajali komitet a'zolari, hurmatli parlament a'zolari. Oldi bilan bu qimmatli guvohlik berish fursati berganlar uchun sizlarga ko'p rahmat aytaman. Men vatanimiz Sharq Turkistondan jazo lageri shohidi Kalbinur Sidik. Men vatanimizning Urumchi shahri 24 boshlang'ich maktabda 28 yil Xitoy tili darsida o'qituvchilik qildim va muhim vazifalarda bo'ldim. Men 2017 yil 9 oydan boshlab Ürümçi şəhər Çangfangu tağ üstü qurulğan mana bu ərlər kampusida 6 ay məcbur halda Xitay tili dərs ötüşkə ivətildim. Bu joyda nurg'unlagan mo'ysiped, otalar va qiron yigitlar, savdogarlar, ziyolilar, har qaysi sohalardagi ilg'orlar qabul qilingan edi. Bu sinfimda bir Osman ismli boy bir savdogar bo'lib, keyin bu kishi yo'qolib ketdi. Men u yerdagi kishilardan buning yuqori qon besim va diabet kasali bilan doktorxona operatsiya jarayoni o'lib ketganligi xabarini angladim.
Ko'p rahmat.
Keyin yana bir
Unda
darsda bo'ldi.
Sizga ko'p rahmat. Unda men o'qishni boshlab ketdim, ha?
Oldu. Ben onda olsa vakit çekilmesi sebebinden tövende bu guvallıklarının ceryanını Erken Asya Radyosu Uygur Bölümünün sabık müdürü Avukat Alim Sitop Efendi'nin okup verişini ümit kılmen. Rahmet.
Honorable Chair, distinguished members and respect committee members, thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Kalbinur Sidik. I am from Urumqi, our homeland, East Turkestan. I'm a witness to the detention camps, and I am ethnically Uzbek. For 20 years, I worked as a Chinese language teacher and held important administrative positions at Urumqi number 24 elementary school. Never did I imagine that one day I would be forced to teach inside a detention camp, or that I would become a witness to the crimes committed by the Chinese Communist Party against Uyghurs and other minority peoples. Today I stand before you to speak about atrocities, including the possibility of organ harvesting. I'll tell you only the truth, only what I personally witnessed and experienced. In March 2017, I was sent under a 6-month contract to teach in a men's camp located on a mountain in Saifango village, number 5 Saifango village, Urumqi city. The authorities told us we would be teaching students in a literacy training course, but they were not students. They were prisoners. There were fathers, young men, businessmen, religious figures, intellectuals, people from all walks of life. There are ordinary citizens. There were also elderly men among them. They had been taken from their homes, imprisoned behind barbed wire, triple iron gates, surveillance cameras, armed guards, and locked cells. Every Monday, no classes were held for the detainees. Instead, blood was drawn from them. They were given unidentified injections. Afterwards, they were given small white pills. Chinese nurses told me these are vitamins or calcium supplements. Since the detainees never see sunlight, the government ordered us to take care of them this way. But I did not believe them. How could the government that imprisoned, starved, tortured, and humiliated these people suddenly care about their vitamins? No, that was impossible. At that time and even now, I believe there was another purpose behind it. I also witnessed healthy men disappearing. I clearly remember one man named Osman. He was active in class and eager to learn. He was a wealthy businessman and appeared very strong and healthy at first. Among hundreds of people, I could easily recognize his face. Then one day, he disappeared. When I asked what happened to him, I was told he suffered from high blood pressure and diabetes and had died on the way to the hospital. There was another man who sat at the far end of the first row in the classroom. He too was hardworking, and I still remember his face vividly. Later, he also disappeared. I was told he died from kidney poisoning. I did not believe in these explanations. Every day in the classroom, detainees were constantly replaced. Older and stronger prisoners were taken away, while new ones arrived. A familiar face disappeared, and we were expected to accept whatever explanation the guards gave us. Later, when I testified before parliaments in various countries, I was asked about the disappearance of detainees and organ harvesting. I told them what I had heard while working in the camps. The special police driver who transported me and the police officer assigned to accompany me often talked among themselves. They said, right now in our country, the halal organ trade is booming. The detoxification center in Michuan County, Urumqi, has now become an organ transplant center. I did not witness the surgeries. I did not personally see organs being removed, but I heard these conversations. Later, after hearing my testimony, a close relative and friend of mine living in Europe, married to a foreigner, spoke to me on the condition of anonymity. She personally told me that Meituan's detoxification center had indeed been transformed into an organ extraction hospital. In 2018, she and her foreign husband were sent there for medical examinations before leaving for Europe. During that process, she saw many young detainees wearing prison uniforms, lined up under heavy Chinese police supervision, entering designated rooms. She also observed that the number of doctors had increased greatly, and that doctors were carrying unusual containers in their hands as they exited the rooms. She told me this and begged me to speak about it in my testimony. So for the second time, I heard directly from someone I personally knew, someone who claimed to have seen with her own eyes that this place had become an organ harvesting hospital. In the camps, I witnessed blood collections from detainees, injections, forced medications, disappearances, and the secrecy surrounding everything. Therefore, if you ask me today whether I believe the Chinese Communist Party turned Uyghurs in the camps into a source of profit through a so-called halal organ trade, my answer is yes, yes, 100 times yes. While I was in these camps, I witnessed horrors beyond words. Chinese police humiliate detainees to a level no human being should endure. They stripped them of their humanity. They did not call them by their names, but by numbers. They tried to break their minds, destroy their faith, and erase their destiny. Let me tell you more about what I witnessed, so the world will never forget about the genocide that's taking place in East Turkestan. When I first entered the men's camp, I walked into a building surrounded by barbed wire, electric doors, armed police, soldiers, locked gates. The detainees were brought out from their cells. Chains and shackles were on their hands and feet. Many still had unshaven beards because they had only recently arrived. Their eyes looked at me with desperation, as if I had come to save them. But I could not save them. I could not even help them. Guards surrounded me everywhere. The cells were dark. The windows were still shut. The detainees slept on bare concrete floors with only a thin blanket. For all 3 meals, they received only a small Chinese bun and watery rice soup. They were allowed to use toilet only for a very short period of time. During the entire 6 months I was there, they were never once allowed to bathe. Their bodies weakened, their face changed. Healthy people become thin, pale, and exhausted. I taught 4 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, sometimes even for additional hours during inspection periods. But gradually I realized the purpose there was not education. The purpose was control. Later, detainees were forced to memorize red songs, patriotic songs praising the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping, and political slogans. The detainees were forced to praise the same Communist Party that had imprisoned them. They were forced to express gratitude toward the very system destroying them. During lessons, police would call detainees out, not by name, by their number, then take them for interrogation. The interrogation room was next to the classroom. Shortly after they were taken away, heartbreaking screams could be heard. They were tortured with devices such as electric batons, electric tiger chairs, electric gloves, and electric helmets. After my 6-month assignment in the men's camp ended, I was sent to a women's camp located at Tugong, Saibak District, Urumqi. There I saw many women and girls. Most were highly educated. Their hair had been cut short. They wore gray prison uniforms with blue numbered vests over them. Their faces were pale and lifeless. About 90% of these detainees were between 18 and 40 years old. The remaining 10% were older women, some even in their 70s and 80s. These women and girls were also given medication and unidentified injections. As a result, many of them completely stopped menstruating. Some had studied abroad. During lessons, they were forced to thank the Chinese Communist Party and the government before telling their stories. One woman said she had recently given birth and still had a nursing baby, but her breast milk had stopped. Another young woman stated she had been preparing for marriage when she was suddenly taken to the camp. Excuse me. And she no longer even knew where her fiancé was. Yet she was forced to thank the government for providing such a great opportunity to learn the national language. Others say they had been taken directly to the camp immediately after returning from studies abroad. From the way these women painfully sat and stood, I could sense the severe abuse they had suffered. Tears constantly streamed from their eyes. In this camp, I heard about rape and sexual violence committed by Chinese police. I heard that guards use electric batons and other weapons to abuse these detainees. I personally witnessed the body of a young girl around 18 to 20 years old being carried away before my eyes. I later heard that she had bled to death. Outside camps, the control continued. The Chinese government placed so-called Chinese parent relatives, Han Chinese men, inside the homes of Uyghur women, especially in homes where husbands had been taken to the camps. Even in their own homes, these women faced various forms of abuse and humiliation. People were afraid to speak. Phones were monitored. Relatives abroad became a source of danger. My daughter at the time was in the Netherlands, and we lived constantly in fear and anxiety. Under pressure from neighborhood committees, assigned police officers, we were also forced to undergo sterilization procedures at Changleyuan Hospital in Tianshan District. Even though I did not want this, I had no choice. My safety and the safety of my family depended on obeying government demands. That's why I say we no longer had ownership over our bodies. I am one of the fortunate few who managed to escape after enduring tremendous suffering. The people inside the camps cannot speak to you. They have no way to make their voices heard. I am standing here today and at enormous personal cost to tell you this truth. Because the man who disappeared, the women who were abused, and the mothers separated from their children, and the families destroyed by this genocide need witnesses. Honorable Chair, distinguished members of the committee, I ask you not to turn your eyes away from this tragedy. The horrific violence taking place in East Turkestan is not merely a crime. It's part of the system that sees Uyghurs, the original inhabitants of this land, as less than human. This is genocide. The world once said never again, yet East Turkestan, it is happening again. I ask the U.S. Congress never to forget the Uyghur genocide. I urge you to continue your investigations and hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that very powerful testimony. It's shocking, and it hopefully is a wake-up call to even more people who will hear it today, and we will amplify it through this commission, I can assure you. I'll ask my questions last, but I'd like to yield to my good friend and colleague, Mr. Strong of Alabama, and then to Congresswoman Elise Stefanik from New York.
Thank you, Representative Smith, for holding this important hearing, and thank you to the staff for their hard work. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today, for bringing attention to China's forced organ harvesting and trafficking. This first question is for any of the witnesses that would like to answer. Can you provide an assessment of whether any U.S. entities such as hospitals, universities, or research partners have collaborated with the CCP transplant institutions engaging in illegal organ harvesting and trafficking practices?
I can speak to it briefly, but in terms of the details, probably afterwards. I understand that there is actually information that has been gathered at HHS. There's some sort of report that's been gathered by HHS that touches on this question that is kind of, perhaps needs to be dislodged from under a lot of bureaucracy. That's one quick answer. There's an example. The Select Committee wrote a letter to Harvard University about a number of research partnerships that they had. I believe that was last year or within the last couple of years. We trained over 100 transplant surgeons here in the United States from different institutions. That's an obvious connection. I think it would be an amazing effort to try to catalog all of this. And this is something that I'm actually in the process of trying to do, but obviously institutions are uninterested in being terribly cooperative in providing that information if they can avoid it. So that's a roundabout answer for you. Perhaps some of the others here can provide some more exact specifics.
Any other insight from any of the other witnesses?
You know, I did mention Thermo Fisher because they stand out. What our witness here was talking about really didn't begin in 2016 or 2017. It was signaled in 2013 by an unusual tactic, which the police of China used on Falun Gong, actually, initially, and they were coming into people's homes. These were people not in detention, but they were coming into their homes and doing a blood test and a DNA cheek swab. This happened in 5 to 6 provinces. There's a little dispute about the 6th. The point is that the DNA cheek swab indicated a new method. Some Human Rights Watch interpreted it as a surveillance tool, and that's probably right. But it's also completely compatible with tissue matching, tissue typing, and cross-matching. So that is followed by Thermo Fisher supplying the DNA kits for testing the entire Uyghur and Kazakh population of Xinjiang. Now, this is not something that Han Chinese, they were exempt, and they're practically half the population. But the entire population, everybody above the age of 12 had to be tested. And the DNA kits apparently were all supplied by Thermo Fisher. They made a killing in this market.
Let me ask you this right here. Do any of the witnesses have factual data related to how these body parts are coming to America? And, you know, they've got to get here somehow. Anybody, any of that going on?
Can I just jump in on that? I don't believe parts are coming to America, really. I mean,
There are people that believe they are.
well, that's fine, but it's certainly not my experience in China on the ground. Is they like to have complete control of organ harvesting, and I've never seen absolutely persuasive evidence, other than certainly there's good speculation, probably correct, about fetal body parts and fetal tissue being sold to our great universities. I don't think there's any question that they've moved on from Planned Parenthood, and China's the supplier. Proving that, of course, conclusively is
Absolutely.
very important.
Okay. Do you believe the existing U.S. safeguards are enough to prevent American institutions from indirectly endorsing or profiting from these practices, or should the U.S. government explore further measures such as increased transparency, reporting, or funding restrictions?
I think those are absolutely necessary and totally plausible, and they are things that we should be doing in face of this documentation, eyewitnesses of what's taking place. I mean, that's what Congress should be doing, and passing the bills like the forced organ or stopping forced organ harvesting, and including these types of provisions in that type of bill. Broad support, and I think it also is a moral stand for people in this country to take through their members of Congress to pass such legislation. We will not participate in any way, shape, or form in this type of horrific practice, and here's how we're expressing that.
Thank you. Mr. Gutmann, in your estimation, what is the scale and scope of illegal sourced organs in China?
I'm not there with a clipboard, but, and my work is concentrated on the Uyghurs, but I do believe that this is the main source now. Our 2016 report was done with David Kilgore and David Matus, and a team of Falun Gong researchers who had spent 5 years collecting the data. Now, we came up with the idea that organs were basically, the transplant hospitals had been rationalized to about 150, or now it's more like 200, and that they were doing at least one transplant per day based on their capabilities. That quickly leads you to a number at least of 60,000.
Okay.
And we believe, I believe that it's more closer to 100,000.
Thank you, Mr. Gutmann. Mr. Brownback, can you elaborate on how religious freedom can play a strategic role in our diplomatic engagement strategy with the CCP, and how would you recommend that tool be wielded to strengthen U.S. leadership and diplomacy?
I think you just watch and study what Ronald Reagan did in the face-off with the Soviet Union. It was the same godless, atheistic society. He traveled across the country. He pointed this out. He said, and then he also talked about what was the treatment of Jews in the country and evangelicals, the Jewish refuseniks. He brought the American public into it, and that's what has to be done. I think we can, and I think this is a critical piece of our theater engagement strategy with the CCP, which we're now engaged in. How are we going to fight with this group? Is religious freedom. They can't tolerate it. They can't stand it. The American public strongly supports it. Western civilization does. So we need to start talking about that differentiation, and we need to start thinking about it in those sorts of strategic engagement ways. We ought to invite Chinese dissidents that have been persecuted for their faith to the White House to meet with the President, the Vice President, meet with the Secretary of State as a show. They ought to bring the head, invite the person that started Falun Gong, Li Hongzhi, see if he would come to the White House to meet with the President. He's exiled in the United States in New York. And this is a group that's been decimated, slaughtered in the most vile of ways, because they can't tolerate this indigenous faith that is so natural to China. It's a blended kind of faith of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucian thought, but it's very natural to China, and it was a complete threat to the Chinese Communist Party. And all the Falun Gong wants is a return to the old Chinese civilization that existed before the communists took over. That's really all they want. And so bring them in and start authenticating. And then I also think it would be wise for us to start talking with Tibetan individuals and Tibet authorities about the future of Tibet. This is a place that's never been a part of China. We should be bringing those individuals and talking with them as well. I've got a list of other specific items in my testimony.
Thank you. And Mr. Brownback, this will be my final question. How has intimidation against religious groups outside of China impacted these groups, their worship, their advocacy, their personal lives?
Horribly. Yeah, most Uyghurs I talk to and work with have had family members back home that have disappeared, been killed. They've Falun Gong members that will cite to those. I've had people in this country who have been tracked, shot at, that have testified to me, that have been open people that have testified against what's going on in the CCP, tracked, marked, tires slashed in this country. This transnational oppression, or another person referred to as transnational terrorism. And I think we've really got to be much more aggressive at prosecuting these cases when they happen in this country.
Thank you. I thank each of our witnesses for being here today, and also to Peter and Bob. It's an honor to have each of you here.
Could I answer your earlier question, Congressman? Just one thing that the U.S. government, one way in which we've interacted with Communist China in the past is, kind of there's all these sort of methods that were, I guess, instrumentalizations that were set on autopilot. So, for example, we're still transferring technology to Communist China as a matter of policy in different places, like in embassies. But one example of this in this context, right, is these federal-wide assurances that HHS grants to different bodies around the world. And basically, it's been described to me by someone as kind of a rubber stamp in some terms. And basically what it does is, from the perspective of the U.S. government, this institution is okay to work with. So we know some number of these transplant hospitals, we should make sure that none of them have one of these federal-wide assurances. I mean, again, there's a whole bunch of different specific policy recommendations that can help us cut off all relationships with their transplant system. Obviously, if we accept this is real, which I hope we can finally put into law sometime soon, why are we working with any institutions that are involved with this, right?
Thank you. Chairman Smith, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now yield to distinguished gentlelady from New York. I want to thank her as well for her new book, Poison Ivies, which is a really, really incisive book about anti-Semitism and the Ivy League. And, you know, Sam Brownback, before I yield, made a very, very good point about Reagan and what he did vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. He raised human rights. He did it tenaciously, as did Schultz as Secretary of State and others. Always named names, and that's what President Trump was trying to do with Jimmy Lai and others. And both the House and the Senate passed resolutions to that effect and named names that hopefully can effectuate or help them gain their freedom. But China has always gotten a buy. Years ago, there was a book called China Misperceived, and Stephen Mosher wrote in on how they always are given a buy when it comes to human rights. Well, that has to end. It is ending. Your testimonies and your great work, your books have made a difference. But I want to thank my good friend for her new book and for her leadership.
Thank you so much, Chairman Smith, and thank you to the chairman for his extraordinary decades of leadership on human rights issues and so many other important issues. Thank you to each of you for testifying today. Incredibly disturbing testimony, but important to hear this in Congress and for the American people to hear this. I want to start with you, Mr. Jekielek. How do I say that?
Jekielek, that's
Jekielek.
great. Yeah.
In your testimony, you mentioned American universities partnering with CCP transplant centers to train transplant surgeons and conduct joint research. You also mentioned that some of these partnerships received NIH funding. Do you have a comprehensive list that you can provide this commission of instances where there is U.S. government-funded American universities that are funding transplant research supported by the CCP? I know you mentioned you're putting together
Correct.
that list.
I don't know if I can provide a comprehensive list because it's a process, but I will provide the best list I can. Yeah.
I recently introduced legislation to ban federal funding to universities that employ foreign researchers who were previously employed by the Chinese Communist government, specifically those that work in sensitive research areas. Do you agree that U.S. taxpayer dollars should not go to universities that financially, directly or indirectly, support the Chinese government facilitating illegal organ harvesting?
So this is a complete no-brainer, absolutely. And just as a matter of fact, right, even people that come here, there are people that come here that want freedom, that are not wanting to work for the Chinese Communist Party, but their national intelligence law demands that they do, that they provide, that they basically spy and not admit that they're doing so. So it's a very difficult situation that people are put in. But I would say any sensitive area, forced organ harvesting, absolutely, but any sensitive area, it doesn't make sense.
One other concern that I have raised is some American universities, as we know, operate branch campuses in communist China. And I recently introduced legislation to stop the flow of taxpayer dollars to these institutions that frankly are profiting off of our adversaries. Are you concerned that these universities, and therefore American taxpayers, could be directly or indirectly implicated in cases of organ harvesting?
I'm absolutely concerned. I don't know of specific instances of this, but again, you can sort of imagine this sort of the thesis, I guess, of my book, the true nature of America's biggest adversary. You have to understand the Communist Party. This is a group, this is a regime that does these sorts of horrible things to people. Imagine how they view, you know, sort of gullible or financially incentivized Americans who have set up a campus in communist China. It's not good intent, let's say.
Thank you. Ambassador Brownback, thank you for your leadership. You mentioned a number of actions the U.S. should take on the world stage to raise this issue, and yet we have seen in international organizations like the UN, they have been incredibly uncooperative, despite the fact that American taxpayers are footing the majority of the bill. Do you think, well, let me ask it this way, How can the U.S. strongly lead on these issues of human rights? And I think I know the answer to this. Do you think the UN can be a reliable partner of the United States when it comes to addressing this? I certainly do not think it's a reliable partner.
I think they've proven no. They're not interested. But I think more than that, they're so infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party, the UN is, and so many of the various branches and entities of it. Even if they wanted to, I don't think they could get it. I don't think they could get it done. But that's why it's incumbent upon us, and we're the only country in the world that can do this. Nobody else. So at the G20, religious freedom should be front and center. And remember, they fear religious freedom more than they fear our aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons. This goes right at control to them, and they've got the fastest growing Christian population in the world. So they know this. And they're looking and saying, we've got to hold this down, and these are people we should be standing with and backing aggressively everywhere that we can, and we've got a lot of tools so we can do that, as I've mentioned some of those already.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for conducting this very important hearing. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stefanik. Again, good luck on your book. I think everyone needs to read it. Just a couple of thoughts, and again, I want to thank you all for your brilliant testimony. Just on the point of universities and colleges, because I held a whole series of hearings on the soft power of trying to get these colleges to conform to the CCP's will. I had a hearing with the head of NYU. I had the top person there, the chancellor, testify. I invited myself to go because I'm barred from going, like you, Sam, and like our, I'm on their hit list. And I actually got a visa when he said you can come. But what shocked me about NYU is that they get a campus in Shanghai, fully paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. I asked them about if somebody raises Tibet or faces Falun Gong on the campus, or they go online and they because obviously the online, the internet is completely policed. Or if a woman gets pregnant and she's single, did not get permission by the government, and this was in 2016 that I had this hearing, is she forcibly aborted? Because we know that forced abortion is absolutely one of the most horrendous things. It was a crime against humanity in Nuremberg against the Nazis, and it's no less by the Chinese Communist Party. Scott Flipsy and I went on that trip. The students seemed eager to hear about human rights. Not so much so with some of the other people, particularly the Chinese top people who were teaching at that institution. But I was shocked that, they were charging an enormous amount of money to go there. I asked, who picks who gets in here? What kind of selection process? I say only this because there has been shameless complicity on the part of our universities and colleges. Some may have stood up. Even Mosier, he exposed the forced abortion of China in early 80s, and then I did an amendment on it in 1984 to stop any funding to the UNFPA or anybody else. Based on his research, Michael Weiskopf wrote a great piece for the Washington Post on that very thing, 3-part series, about how horrible it was. But Stanford then went to him and said, you're out, you're not getting your doctorate, because they wanted access. So I hope that our universities, if there's any complicity, and I'm sure there is, with this terrible cruelty of forced organ harvesting, will absolutely disassociate, call it out. Maybe you're going to be denied some access, and we see with the businesses. Sam, you remember, Mr. Ambassador, just how conforming American corporations are and continue to be to what the mantra is being spread by China and by Beijing, because they don't want to lose access. They don't want to lose their market. We saw it even during the most recent Olympics. So my thought is, again, Scott and I went over there. I gave a major speech on human rights, and I saw people grimacing. And it was a one and done. They didn't invite me back. But I'm just so worried about this complicity. Our bill will say anybody in that supply chain for forced organ harvesting, we're going to come after you and we're going to prosecute you. You can't let these Falun Gong practitioners continue to be killed, and Uyghurs and others. 28 years old, as you said, 29 years old. And maybe, Mr. Gutmann, you could further elaborate on and any of you, what does they go through? You know, when you're strapped down, given an anesthetic, and you know that they're going to kill you to take your organs, I don't know if there's a greater horror. I mean, all torture is horror, but this is a particularly cruel manifestation of torture, and it's going on right now. And as you know, Mr. Gutmann, they're talking about expanding for the Uyghurs the number of facilities available for this by 2030. They're not going in the direction of, hey, we need to stop this. They're expanding it. And I think we need to be this bill has to pass, and we need to, I mean, the State Department, I love them, but they're not doing due diligence on this the way they could. This will empower state, HHS, the Justice Department, give them brand new tools to go after this horrific supply chain. And again, Americans go there to get their, whatever it is, heart, liver, whatever it might be, and facilitated by brokers. Let's put them behind bars as well. So, but I just brought up the college because, again, Elise has done yeoman's work on how our higher ed have just been shameless when it comes to human rights with regards to Jews, the anti-Semitism that is rife there in many of those places. So if any of you would like to comment on that, you know, I would appreciate it.
I would like to mention one thing. I've made this point before, so I apologize, but I still think it's valid. You know, when we discovered in the 60s that the Soviet Union was torturing dissidents by putting them into mental hospitals, the World Psychiatric Association responded by banning any contact with the Soviet psychiatrists or any of their institutions, and that meant everything. It was a complete ban. There was no work on psychoactive drugs together or anything like that. Now we're looking at a very different situation. I mean, something like Pfizer goes into China and tests Chinese citizens who've had transplants, and they're probably carrying around a Falun Gong or a Uyghur organ, or possibly even a House Christian church organ. This is absolutely should not be defended in any way. And of course, from the academic perspective, they've absolutely not responded at all to this. This should be a blanket ban. That's what we had in the 60s. I'm not saying it worked perfectly. I don't think it really changed Soviet behavior on how many dissidents got thrown into mental hospitals. But at the end of the day, we made a point, and the world made a point. And today, we're just looking at a kind of a chaotic situation, I think, on contact with China.
Congressman, or Co-Chair Smith, we've gotten into this habit, you know, ever since. I remember I interviewed you some years ago, and we talked about how this linkage of human rights and trade was broken during the Clinton administration. And, you know, basically ever since that, human rights have been off the table. They've been in these off the books or quiet dialogues, which basically both sides, from what we learned on reporting, viewed cynically subsequently, like they were purely performative, basically. This human rights, it makes no sense, right? Because if you're, as a regime, you're treating your people in a particular way, in this particular egregious way, right? The Chinese Communist Party has treated, you know, hundreds of thousands of its people. How do they view Americans, right? And this feels lost somehow on people. Like we've gotten into this habit of saying, okay, the human rights, you just keep that off the table. Got to keep it quiet. Got to keep it. Of course, I understand that the U.S. government is raising these things in the appropriate venue and so forth, but as Ambassador Brownback has talked about as well, it's their huge Achilles heel, right? They're doing terrible things to their own people, and we should make our own population here in America as aware as possible of that, right? And not sort of play to the kind of platitudes or their, propaganda that this is all kind of false and just attacks on China and so forth. So I think human rights is the key.
You know, Oh, yeah, Sam.
I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, I thought you said something earlier that I want to double back to, that for years China's been given a buy on this, and they really have for decades, really until President Trump. He's the first president since Kennedy to actually take them on. Now, today he's saying all these things about Xi Jinping that I'm questioning about, but maybe that's part of the negotiating tactic. I hope it is. It seems like to me that buy is starting to be pulled off, and they're getting not a buy as much anymore, and we need to get to the point where they don't get a buy at all, and I think a key piece of this is just really following the money. As a governor, I saw that our universities in our state, the university heads, their primary concern every morning they got up was money. Money coming into the place, make sure the doors were operating. And I don't begrudge them that. They've got a big institutions to run. They got to make sure we got plenty of money coming in here to run this place. That's what they're thinking about. And so China comes along and says, here, we've got resources that you can use, and this will be, that's why you've got to break these two economies apart. That's why the key piece of this, actually, I think two key pieces. One, breaking the economies apart. And second, us standing up for human rights, particularly religious freedom, because it's such a weakness on their part. This is one of those things, it's kryptonite to them. And they do everything they can to suffocate it and hold it out of the room. When they bring up Taiwan, we should bring up religious freedom. When they bring up any of these issues, we should bring these, because this is just something they cannot tolerate. And it's just such an effective tool. And finally, I think we ought to also double back and really press about opening up the great internet firewall that China has. Can you, I mean, this is the second largest economy in the world, and you got an internet firewall around your people? Come on, that's not leadership, that's suffocation. And we really should embarrass them about it.
You know, very interesting point about the internet. On one of my trips when I could get a visa, I went to an internet cafe. I typed in torture, and I got everything about what the Imperial Japan did vis-a-vis torture, and George Bush at Gitmo, which was false in my opinion, but it was still there. Then I put in Manfred Nowak, and he was mentioned earlier because he did a tremendous job at exposing, on behalf of the UN, the torture there. And nothing, nothing. I put in Tiananmen Square. I got nothing but pretty pictures of people smiling in Tiananmen Square. No tanks, no tank man, no anything. It was really amazing. And so we really have to find our voice more than ever right now. I remember meeting Wei Jingsheng after he was allowed out in 1994. The Chinese Communist Party thought they would get the Olympics 2000 by doing that. They didn't get it. They rearrested him. But while he was out, I was in Beijing. We had dinner together, and he says, please, will you Americans understand this? When you kowtow and you weakly approach the Chinese Communist Party, they beat us more in prison. And he's the father of the democracy wall movement. He suffered almost death at the hands of his torturers. And it's like, we've got to find our voice and stop saying, oh, by the way, human rights. I mean, it doesn't work that way. We have to be so upfront. And this issue of killing people, you know, I read a book before I came to Congress about Unit 731, where Imperial Japan did horrific torture against people, mostly service members, and during World War II in China. And I look at that, then I look at what they're doing now and say, you know, you hated what happened to you, and I do too, but why are you replicating it in very, very large numbers beyond that? So but I would like to ask Mr. Gutmann, if you don't mind, walk us through, if you could, or any of you, what a victim goes through. They've already been typed, they're, you know, for their blood type and all the other things, so that a match can be immediately be made. You had said before that there's pretty much an equal male to female, the number of women that are being, average age 28 to 29, being slaughtered, murdered for their organs, as well as males, men, young men. And if you could just, what is this like?
I would, this is perhaps not the answer people want to hear in a way, but it's actually less painful than it used to be, partly because of Dr. Ko and Jia, who pioneered this technique of using ECMO, okay? That meant originally what you would have to do is do very light anesthesia, okay, because you don't want to put a sluggish organ into another human being, right? So the anesthesia had to be very light, and it was actually a very painful procedure, according to Nijat, who was a Uyghur who worked with the PSB. Now, when he put in this new technique, it basically meant you could put the person under pretty much full anesthesia, and you'd have the oxygenated organ. It would be kind of running through, so you had constant, kind of in a loop. You go into slow motion, but not that bad. And basically that meant that you could take out the organs in a much more rational way. And you could take them out slower, and you could one after the other, and finally the heart's the last to go. I don't think the person is actually feeling that much. I think if you want, we've made improvements in this area. Now, the problem with that is that it also means that the person who was worth, you could only get an organ or two out of and plausibly get it to the destination. This is something Didi Kirsten-Tatlow from the New York Times worried about a lot. That person is now worth a lot more money, because you can take out maybe up to 5 organs successfully, or 4 organs. Before it was only 1 or 2. Now we're in a very different situation, because you've got like 16 hours, 24 hours to work with this perfusion method. And I'm not saying it's ECMO right now. By the way, I went to Taiwan for 6 months to try to figure this out, and I don't know which perfusion method they are using. I know it started with ECMO. And ECMO, this is an off-label use. For any doctors out there listening, I am not criticizing ECMO. It's a life-saving device. It's fantastic. But this is the way it's been used. And we're looking at a very kind of brave new world situation. I was saying that they don't take organs around the world. That's now possible. I'm not saying they're doing it, because I see no actual evidence of that, but it could happen.
But people go there to get the organ, right?
Well, right now, people go to China, but it's increasingly these techniques have led to a different world where it is possible for them to fly out organs, say, to Saudi or somewhere like that, or Russia, or Berlin. This is what we're kind of looking at, and it also means new populations are potentially at risk. I don't want to, we don't see the evidence for this now. As far as I'm concerned, the Chinese are a lot like the old Soviet Union. They like to keep their rocket ships landing right in the country, not in international waters. And that's the way they've been, but.
And just the average cost? I mean, how much do they make, like, for a liver or some other organ?
Well, it depends on who's buying it. Obviously, if it's a foreigner, it's going to be about, $100,000 for a liver these days, or something like that, and more like $200,000 for a heart or lungs, where you sometimes get a package deal. Now, if you're Japanese and don't want to negotiate, you might end up paying $1 million. So there's huge differences between, say, Koreans, Japanese, Germans, Americans, and so forth. But we are still talking about huge profits potential on every individual who's this healthy and is done correctly. Thanks.
Co-Chair Smith, I just wanted to comment on the new populations. So one of the things I noticed kind of anecdotally, I'm very sensitive to this dehumanizing rhetoric that's used to target the population first to get the rest of the population to kind of accept horrible things being done. It looked to me anecdotally that there's this uptick of that against Christians in China, and I actually talked with Bob Fu over here on American Thought Leaders on my show about this, and this isn't studied empirically sort of thing, but it really does look like, as there's this increased incarceration of Christians with the Zion Church, this restrictions on Catholic clergy and so forth, that there's this increase in dehumanizing rhetoric as well. I would love it if someone would study that empirically, but that's a big concern, because that is always, this dehumanization is a prequel to inclusion and as a group for forced organ harvesting.
Thank you. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Co-Chair Smith. And first, I just want to thank you for your many years of principled commitment to human rights issues and to this commission. I'm new here, but look forward to working with you. And thank you all for being here. As we sit today here, the PRC human rights atrocities, such as forced organ harvesting, the President is participating in the U.S.-China summit. I think it's unfortunate that human rights issues don't seem to be high on the list of agenda topics in that summit, because for years, folks here before us, researchers, ethics experts, survivors, and human rights advocates have raised alarming evidence, presented, I should say, alarming evidence that the PRC has systematically targeted Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and other religious and ethnic minorities for forced organ harvesting. As we've heard today, detainees have been subject to unexplained blood testing and medical screening while in detention camps and prisons, and many later disappeared. Researchers estimate that tens of thousands of individuals, perhaps more, have been killed to supply China's transplant industry. This is a profound moral crisis, and I thank all of our witnesses for your commitment to addressing it. Now, this commission, thanks to Co-Chair Smith's leadership, has documented evidence showing that Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities detained may now be a primary source of organs within China's transplant system. The targeting of Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs reflects, as we've heard today, a broader campaign of religious persecution that includes Christians in China, ethnic repression and dehumanization carried out by the PRC. And this commission has to continue examining these allegations and working to ensure that the abuses are documented and pushing for them to come to an end. Ms. Sidik, she can hear? Yes. Oh, okay. Ms. Sidik, here in America, folks might hear terms like detention camp or forced labor, but they might not understand what daily life is like in those camps and under this system. Can you just describe for us the atmosphere of fear inside and outside the camps that we've heard about today?
Salam Kalbinur, avazımdan anlaysınız mı?
Aldı be.
Hazır parlament əzası o Akinşal sizdən bir sual sordu. Yəni bu sorğun deyilib. Öyle lagerlan degende meyli tutup durğan lager bolsun, mecbur əmgək lagerləri bolsun deydi. Amerikalıqlar bək düşünüb ketməydi. Şununla siz şu lager işçidiki lənin gündəlik həyatı qandaqlığını, həm sırtkilərin həyatının qandaqlığını bir düşündürüb bəgən bolsunuz deydi. Şunu bir düşündürüb.
Rəhmət, yaxşı bir sualınızға. Mən ərlər lagerda 6 ay turuş jarayonida intayın dəhşətlik zulümlərini öz gözümdə gördüm. Yəni bu yerdəki ərlər kamerlarda 30-dan 40-ça qıslışıb, quruq simotun üstündə yatatdı.
When I was sent to the men's camp for 6 months, I saw horrific atrocities in those camps. One example is just in a little cell, 30 to 40 males are locked up. They sleep on a very thin blanket.
Ular yana atalmış sınıflarga kamerlardan ömülep çıkarttı ve ömülep qaytardı. Onundan sır, yana bular muşundaq 4 xil qiynash usuli orqali so'roqlar jarayonida qiynash apparatdi. Ya'ni so'roqxona sinfning yindiki yarasi uyda bo'lg'achqa, ularning ustidagi nomerlar orqali chaqirib ichikatgandan keyin yarim soat, 1 soatgacha ularning ichinish ovozi butun zalni zilzilaga soladi.
And these detainees are usually crawled in, they're crawled out in a situation like that. And the interrogation room is right next to the classroom. So usually they take detainees out for half an hour and an hour-ish. We hear this extreme screams from these detainees.
Ular atalmış sınıflarda mana şundaq tutqunları zincir bilan kishanlangan holda pakar kichik o'rindiqlarda tugilishib o'tiradi. Har soat darsda boshdan oxiri ularning ko'zlaridan yosh to'xtamaydi. Men u yerda nihoyat o'zim tutib olgan holatda intayin diqqat qilardim. Chunki sinfningki 4 atroflarida butun kameralar bo'lg'achqa, men har bir so'zimda, har bir harakatlarimda diqqat qilishga majbur edim.
And these detainees are all chained and shackled. They are given little tiny chairs to sit down. You could see from their faces how scared, desperate they are. And they are also, you could see cry stream, from their tears. But there is nothing, I can do. I have to be very careful because it's all cameras. And so I have to watch every word and my action in the class.
Kız ayollar kamerdimu, u yer tutqun kız ayollar xuddi Robert odamlarga o'xshash, o'zining hayotidan butunlay umidini uzgan holda shu sinflarda qarab o'tiradi faqatlam. Endi u qiz ayollar kameralaridagi tualetlar shu kamerning ichida bo'lib, bir chelak o'rnatilgan. Bu chelakni 24 soat navbatlashib tugdi. Kamerning ichi, koridorning ichi ichinishliq, naytliq, sisiq puraqning dada tug'ilmaydi.
And in the women's prison, you could see all these women are like robots, you know, no hope, no life in their faces. And the toilet is just a bucket in the cell, you know. They only dumped it once 24 hours. And so their life is really, really horrible. And the cell, the corridors stink because of that.
Tutqun qiz ayollarning sochlari butunlay tushiritilgan. Uçsida bir tutaş mahbus kiyimi var. O mahbus kiyiminin numara besilgan boğaşqa, ularning isimlerini atamasdan numarlı arqılıq çaqırıp əçkitib, ularni dehşetlik soraklarını qılatdı. Kız ayollarning sınıflarda o'ltirib va naytı qopqanda qiynalganlıqlardan men ularning ağır derecede soraklarga uchirganligi va shu yerda anglagan saqchilarning har xil shaklda bosqinchiliklarga olib borgan va qo'ldagi elektronlik kaltaklar bilan qiynash olib borganligini o'zim his qilatdim.
All these women's hair are shaved, and they all have vests with numbers. So whenever they are called not by name, by the vest numbers. And I could see when I teach them, they're sitting down, getting up is extremely difficult. You could see clear torture marks. And at times, you know, I hear they were abused and raped.
Bu yerda her düşenbe ders ötülmeydi. Çünkü ularga nama'lum doğru berdi, hukuklurdu ve ularning qanagan boğaşqa qiz ayollarning odatlari butunlay to'xtab ketgan. Hatto bolalar imitib atganlarningmi uslari to'xtab ketgan edi.
And every Monday, these women are given unidentified medications. So mothers who are nursing, their milk stop, and women, some menstruation stop.
Ben bir qıtımla qiz ayollar kamer ders ötken vaqtimda vatan to'g'risida bir temada ders o'tdim. Bu yerda qiz ayollar shuning jumla tuzash jarayonida o'zining hikoyalarini menga aytib berishga tirishadi. Buningda bir qiz dedi, men yangi tug'utdim. Mening bolam tek imbatgan. Men oldin bilan hukumat va partiyaga rahmatimni bildiraman. Chunki bu yerda bir davlat tili o'tish fursatiga meni erishtirdi, ammo mening sutim to'xtab ketdi deb so'zlab berdi.
At one class, I taught about motherland, meaning China, about that. Then one lady stood up and thanked the Chinese Communist Party and the government for giving her the opportunity to study there in the camp, the Chinese language. And at the same time, she talked about that she just had a baby, and in the camp, her milk stopped. And
Yana bir qiz o'quvchi deydi, mening bir haftadan keyin to'yim bo'ladi. Men to'yiqsiz bu yerga kelib kelindim, ammo hukumat partiyaga rahmatimni bildiraman. Men bag'aqlarni taqib bo'lgan, mening qarshi taraf yigitimning qayerligini bilmayman degan hikoyalarni o'z og'zida aytib berdi.
And another young woman also said, you know, I was supposed to get married a week later before I was taken. Invitations, wedding invitations were all out. But I'm grateful for the Chinese Communist Party for taking me here for education, even though I don't know where my fiancé is.
Yana ba'zilar bo'lsa, chet ellarda o'qib, o'zining vataniga qaytib kelganda ota-onasi kamman degan unamay, o'zining vatanini yaxshi ko'rgachga qaytib kelganligini va aeroportda ota-onasini ko'rishmaylar, udulmuş kampalarga kelganligini, o'zining jumla tuzash jarayonida shu Xitoy hukumatiga, partiyasiga oldi bilan rahmatini bildirgandan keyin mushundaq so'zlar bilan o'zining hikoyasini so'zlab berdi.
And some others who came straight from studying overseas, despite their parents telling them not to come back, they returned out of their love for their parents, their homeland. But they were taken from the airport, sent to the camp straight. And there, they also had no choice but to thank the Chinese Communist Party for their treatment. Rahmat.
Thank you, Ms. Sidik, for sharing and for your courage and speaking out. That's all I have, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you.
Rahmat sizning jasoratingizga.
Thank you, my good friend and colleague. I'll just conclude, and anything you would like to add, please do. But first, I want to thank Scott Flipsy for his incredible leadership on this commission, on human rights in general. Scott and I and Frank Wolf, back in 1986, went to Perm Camp 35 in the Ural Mountains, where Sharansky and, what did I say? Oh, he was 19. And pushed for the release of prisoners there. Took us 2 years to get into it. We lobbied like crazy when Gorbachev was saying, glasnost and perestroika, all these buzzwords that they were opening. And what seemed absolutely impossible, we went to the Ural Mountains, to this horrible place where all these prisoners were, and Scott was indispensable to that effort, as he has been in Romania when we fought against Nicholas Ceausescu, and we had many trips there as well. And even the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which I introduced, it got passed in the House, it passed in the Senate under Marco Rubio. It is the law. It was his idea. It was he never wants to take any credit, but I just want to say how grateful I am for all these years of not only never-ending push, and you know, Sam, how important it is to have a staffer like Scott, but also to be so creative. The Uyghur Human Rights Act, Forced Labor Act, I should say. Another thing he billed that is law right now that has made the difference, and this is the guy that did it. So I just want to thank him. And he'll get mad at me later and say, you shouldn't have done that, but I am so grateful for his leadership, and on this issue, has just been incredible as well. So, Scott, thank you, and for all your work on helping to put this very important hearing together. And I just want to say, when our bill passed on March 27th, 2023, Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act, went nowhere in the Senate, and then passed a year ago, May 7th of 2025. When it passed that time, the Chinese embassy went into overdrive to say what a liar I was, that I'm making it all up. Overdrive. And then almost at the same time, their foreign ministry had said, anybody who wants to go to Xinjiang, nothing to hide, come on. So we did a letter that night when they said that. I said, I want to lead a congressional delegation there. I want to go to the camps. We've done it, and we've done it many times. I even met with Shanana Guzmao when he was in an Indonesia camp, way back. You can do it, or jail, I should say. And I re-offered that hope again that the Chinese will let members of Congress travel to China, to go to places. If you go over there and talk trade and say, let's make a deal, the doors are wide open. But when you go over there and say human rights matter, religious freedom, as Sam Brownback says, is at the very top of our concerns, the door is slammed shut. So I reiterate that request to the Chinese embassy to allow me and others to travel to Xinjiang and to China. But also, we need to pass this bill. We need to pass it yesterday for all those victims, and this atrocity must end. If anyone would like to add anything before we close? Again, your testimonies really show us the way, and I thank you for that. Hearing's adjourned. All members have, five legislative days to revise and extend, and to add any extraneous matter they would like. And I would hope if there are any additional questions from the commissioners, we will give them to you, and please get back to us as quickly as you can. Hearing's adjourned.